If I stay until sunrise, they'll take my baby and call it duty. Ethan Parker whispered the words to himself as the departure board flickered above the nearly empty station. It was 11:47 p.m. and the last train to Belhaven would leave in 13 minutes. His fingers tightened around the handle of a small canvas bag containing 2 shirts, $300 in cash, his mother's old photograph, and the medical envelope that had changed everything. Pregnant. The word still felt impossible. Only that morning, Dr. Harris had spoken gently while Ethan stared at the pale ceiling of a private clinic 3 miles from the Royal District. There was no mistake. Ethan was carrying a child, and the father was Prince Adrian Cole, Crown Prince of Westmont. Ethan rested one trembling hand against his stomach. Nothing looked different yet. No one passing him could possibly know that the future of an entire royal family might be hidden beneath his gray sweater. That was exactly how he wanted it. Across the station, a television above a closed coffee stand suddenly brightened. Ethan froze when Adrian's face appeared on the screen. Even through a grainy broadcast, Adrian looked composed in his dark suit, every inch the prince the country expected him to be. A reporter spoke about growing pressure from the Royal Council and rumors of an upcoming announcement concerning Adrian's future marriage. Ethan stopped listening after that. Marriage, alliance, succession. Those words had followed Adrian everywhere, even into the quiet moments when he had insisted that Ethan mattered more than tradition. Ethan had wanted to believe him, but believing Adrian was different from trusting the crown. The announcement for Belhaven sounded through the station. Ethan turned away from the television. His phone vibrated inside his coat. Adrian. For one terrible second, Ethan almost answered. He imagined that familiar voice asking where he was, and he knew his courage would disappear. Instead, he switched the phone off. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though Adrian was nowhere near enough to hear it. Ethan boarded the train and chose a window seat near the back. When the doors closed, his reflection floated against the dark glass, pale and frightened but determined. The city began sliding away, towers becoming distant lights, then scattered sparks against the night. Ethan pressed the medical envelope against his chest. "You're not going to be raised as somebody's obligation," he murmured to the child he could not yet hold. "You get to be a person first." By morning, Adrian was standing inside Ethan's apartment. The bed was neatly made. The closet door stood open. Half the hangers were empty. Ethan's favorite mug was gone, along with the framed photograph of his mother. Adrian called his name once, although the silence had already answered him. Then he noticed something on the kitchen counter, Ethan's palace access card. It had been placed carefully beside the key to the apartment. Adrian stared at both objects without touching them. This was not an impulsive departure. Ethan had planned it. He had erased himself from Adrian's world piece by piece. Adrian reached for his phone and called Ethan again. The call went directly to voicemail. He tried twice more before lowering the phone. On the other side of the state, Ethan stepped onto a quiet Belhaven platform beneath the first light of morning, carrying one small bag and a secret that could change the crown forever. Belhaven smelled like fresh bread and rain when Ethan stepped outside the station, and for the first time in years, nobody knew his name. He stood beneath the faded green awning as morning traffic rolled along Main Street, one hand gripping his canvas bag while the other rested protectively against his coat. The town was smaller than he remembered from photographs, barely 12,000 people surrounded by wooded hills and long stretches of farmland. There were no palace gates, no reporters waiting beside black cars, and no officials watching every person who approached him. Here, Ethan Parker could disappear. By noon, he had rented a modest room above a family-owned bookstore from an older woman named Margaret Hayes. The room had slanted ceilings, a narrow bed, and one window overlooking Main Street. It was nothing like the elegant apartment Adrian had arranged for him in the capital, but when Margaret handed him the key without asking questions, Ethan nearly cried from relief. He paid 2 months in advance using cash and wrote Ethan Parker on the rental agreement. Parker had been his mother's last name before marriage, common enough to attract no attention and familiar enough to feel like home. That afternoon, Ethan sat beside the window and finally opened the medical envelope. The words were clinical and ordinary, but his eyes remained fixed on the estimated due date. 7 months. 7 months until the secret inside him became someone he could hold. His thoughts betrayed him by returning to Adrian. They had met 11 months earlier at a literacy fundraiser where Ethan had been helping coordinate volunteers. Adrian had arrived surrounded by officials, cameras, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Yet after the event, Ethan had found him alone in the library, returning books volunteers had forgotten on the tables. A prince doing work nobody would photograph. That was the Adrian Ethan had fallen for. Not the crown prince from television, but the man who remembered how Ethan took his coffee and once drove 40 miles because Ethan had casually mentioned missing his mother's apple pie. Their relationship had remained private because Adrian wanted something in his life that belonged only to him. Ethan had accepted that until palace conversations began changing. Advisors mentioned succession more frequently. Newspapers speculated about suitable royal marriages. Then Ethan overheard two senior officials discussing Adrian's future children as if they were pieces on a chessboard. Bloodline, stability, public approval. Ethan had stood behind a half-open door listening until one sentence made his stomach turn cold. The crown could not afford uncertainty surrounding an heir. Now Ethan understood what his child would become the moment the palace learned the truth. Not simply a baby, but a royal question requiring committees, security plans, announcements, and expectations before the child could even speak. Ethan closed the envelope. His phone remained powered off at the bottom of his bag. He wondered how many times Adrian had called. 20? 50? He almost reached for it. Instead, he remembered Adrian's face on the station television and the words future marriage. Not yet, Ethan whispered. Back in the capital, Adrian had already rejected the explanation everyone offered him. His chief secretary suggested Ethan had become overwhelmed. A palace advisor quietly implied that perhaps Ethan had simply wanted to leave. Adrian knew better. Ethan had taken clothing, money, and his mother's photograph, but he had left behind expensive gifts Adrian had given him. Whatever Ethan was running toward, it was not money. Whatever he was running from had frightened him enough to abandon the man he loved. Adrian stood beside Ethan's empty kitchen counter and stared at the access card for a long time. Then he made one decision the royal council would never approve. He would search privately. No announcement. No police bulletin. No reporters. If Ethan was hiding from the palace, Adrian would not send the palace after him. In Belhaven, Ethan watched evening settle over Main Street as warm lights appeared behind shop windows. He placed the medical envelope inside a wooden drawer and turned the small brass key. For the next 7 months, he told himself, he needed only to remain invisible. Neither Ethan nor Adrian knew that 7 months would become 5 years. 3 months passed, and Ethan learned that disappearing was not the same as being forgotten. Every morning in Belhaven began with the church clock striking 7 and the smell of cinnamon drifting from Miller Bakery across Main Street. Ethan found part-time work at the bookstore below his room, organizing shelves, preparing online orders, and helping Margaret with customers who rarely asked anything more personal than where to find the mystery novels. His life became deliberately small. He walked 6 blocks to the grocery store, attended appointments at a clinic 15 miles outside town, and avoided photographs whenever community events filled Main Street. As his pregnancy became harder to hide beneath loose sweaters, Margaret quietly reduced his heavier tasks without demanding an explanation. One rainy afternoon, she left a bowl of vegetable soup outside his door with a note telling him to rest. Ethan stared at that simple kindness longer than he expected. In the capital, Adrian was learning a different kind of patience. His private search had produced almost nothing. Ethan had stopped using his bank account. His phone had never turned on again. There were no airline reservations, hotel records, or messages to mutual friends. Adrian refused every suggestion that Ethan had simply decided to begin another life. He remembered details other people overlooked. Ethan hated crowded airports. He preferred trains. He carried cash for emergencies because his mother had taught him never to depend entirely on cards. Most importantly, Ethan never abandoned people without a reason. Adrian spent evenings studying rail routes, leaving the capital on the night Ethan disappeared. There were 17 possible destinations. He visited several himself under the excuse of regional royal engagements, always searching crowds for one familiar face. Nothing. Meanwhile, pressure around Adrian tightened. The royal council wanted certainty about succession and a politically useful marriage. Adrian answered every proposal the same way. No. His refusal became entertainment for newspapers, but he stopped reading them. Somewhere, Ethan occasionally saw the headlines anyway. Each one reopened the question he had tried to bury. What if Adrian really was refusing because of him? Then another thought always followed. What if the palace eventually forced him to choose? Ethan could survive losing Adrian. He could not gamble his child's future on royal promises. By his 7th month, the baby had become an undeniable presence in his daily life. Ethan would sit beside his window at night with both hands resting over his stomach, talking softly about ordinary things. The bookstore, Margaret's terrible coffee, the red maple outside the station. He never mentioned crowns. He never mentioned succession. Sometimes he mentioned Adrian. Your father loves old jazz records, Ethan said one evening, smiling despite himself. And he pretends he does not like pancakes, but he always steals the last one. 2 months later, on a cold November morning, Ethan woke before dawn and knew the waiting was over. Margaret drove him to Belhaven Community Hospital through streets silvered with frost. Hours later, Ethan heard a small cry, and everything else seemed to disappear. The nurse placed his newborn son safely in his arms. Ethan looked down at a tiny face, dark hair, and impossibly serious gray eyes. His breath caught. Adrian's eyes. "Hello, Noah," Ethan whispered. "I have been waiting for you." Nearly 300 miles away, Adrian sat alone in his office after another unsuccessful search. On his desk lay Ethan's old palace access card beside a map covered with 17 carefully marked train routes. Adrian picked up a pen and crossed out another city. Belhaven remained untouched. 5 years later, Noah Parker believed the most important building in Belhaven was not the courthouse, the old church, or even the train station. It was the bookstore with the crooked blue sign on Main Street, because that was where his father worked and where Margaret kept a glass jar filled with peppermint candy behind the register. Ethan had eventually moved out of the small room upstairs and rented a 2-bedroom cottage less than a mile away, with white siding, a narrow porch, and a backyard just large enough for Noah to declare it his kingdom. Their life was ordinary, and Ethan had learned to treasure ordinary things. Saturday pancakes, library afternoons, muddy sneakers beside the front door, Noah asking 17 questions before breakfast. For 5 years, Ethan had protected that little world from everything connected to the crown. Yet Adrian remained present in ways Ethan could never completely erase. Noah had inherited his gray eyes, his serious expression when concentrating, and the strange habit of arranging books by height whenever he became bored. Even his dislike of overly sweet frosting belonged unmistakably to Adrian. "Why are you staring at me?" Noah asked one morning while carefully removing strawberries from his pancakes. Ethan smiled. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" Ethan reached across the table and straightened Noah's collar. "Someone who would also complain about perfectly good pancakes." Noah considered this. "He sounds smart." Ethan laughed, but the sound faded when his eyes landed on the newspaper beside his coffee. Prince Adrian Cole had never married. Over the years, Ethan had followed Adrian's life from a careful distance. The royal council had presented other matches. Adrian had declined them all. His public schedule became increasingly focused on schools, hospitals, libraries, and small communities outside the capital. Ethan sometimes wondered whether those trips had another purpose. He always dismissed the thought before hope could become dangerous. Then, on a bright Monday morning in April, Belhaven changed. Small royal flags appeared along Main Street. Workers began cleaning the town square. Margaret entered the bookstore carrying a stack of flyers and announced that the Crown Prince would visit Belhaven on Friday to open a new regional literacy center. Ethan stopped shelving books. For several seconds, he could hear nothing except the old wall clock. "Friday?" he asked. Margaret nodded. Apparently, he specifically requested Belhaven. Ethan's stomach tightened. That evening, he studied the official route online. Adrian would arrive at the train station, walk through the town square, visit the elementary school, then attend the literacy center ceremony 2 blocks from the bookstore. 2 blocks. Ethan closed the laptop. Avoiding Adrian should have been simple. He could keep Noah home from school and drive 30 miles to another town for the day. By Friday morning, Ethan had packed sandwiches, filled the car with gas, and planned every mile of their escape. Then Noah came downstairs wearing his school backpack. "Dad, you forgot." Ethan looked at him. "Forgot what?" Noah pulled a folded sheet of paper from his backpack. His class had been chosen to welcome the prince at the literacy center. Every child had written a sentence about their favorite book, and Noah had been selected to read his aloud. Ethan stared at the permission form. He had signed it 2 weeks earlier without noticing the name of the guest. "I cannot miss it," Noah said. "Mrs. Carter said I have the clearest reading voice." Ethan looked into those unmistakable gray eyes and realized that protecting Noah could not mean teaching him to run whenever the past came close. At 11:30 that morning, Ethan stood across from the literacy center while a black car stopped beside the curb. The crowd applauded. Adrian stepped out, older than Ethan remembered, calmer, his dark hair touched by the sunlight. Ethan forgot how to breathe. Then Noah slipped his small hand from Ethan's grasp. "My class is over there." Before Ethan could stop him, Noah hurried toward his teacher. Adrian turned toward the children. His polite smile remained in place until his gaze reached one small boy with gray eyes. Then the crown prince became perfectly still. Adrian forgot the speech waiting in his coat pocket. For 5 years, he had trained himself not to search every passing face for Ethan, but nothing had prepared him for the child standing 20 feet away. Noah was listening to his teacher with solemn concentration, holding a sheet of paper in both hands. When the boy looked up, Adrian felt the world narrow to those gray eyes. His eyes. The resemblance was not perfect, yet something about Noah felt painfully familiar. The slight tilt of his head when he listened. The thoughtful crease between his eyebrows. Even the way he carefully straightened the corner of his paper before his turn arrived. Adrian had done that since childhood. "Your Highness," an aide prompted quietly. Adrian forced himself to move. He greeted the principal, thanked the teachers, and followed the planned route toward the children. Noah was third in line. "Your name?" Adrian asked when he reached him. "Noah Parker." "Parker." Adrian's expression changed before he could stop it. Ethan's mother had been Eleanor Parker. He remembered because Ethan had once shown him an old photograph and told him that using his mother's last name would make him feel closer to her. Adrian lowered his voice. "How old are you, Noah?" "5." One word erased the last reasonable explanation Adrian had been trying to construct. 5 years. Ethan had disappeared 5 years ago. Noah studied him with open curiosity. "You have eyes like mine." Adrian almost forgot how to answer. "I was thinking the same thing." Noah smiled, apparently satisfied by the coincidence. Then his teacher called him toward the microphone. Adrian watched him walk away before scanning the crowd. He found Ethan immediately. Ethan stood across the street beside a maple tree, completely motionless. 5 years had changed him in small ways. His hair was slightly longer. His clothes were simpler. There was a steadiness in his posture Adrian did not remember. But it was Ethan. Alive. Safe. Looking directly at him. Adrian had imagined this moment hundreds of times. In those imagined reunions, he demanded answers. He asked why Ethan had left, why he had never called, why Adrian had spent years wondering whether something terrible had happened. Now he could think of only one question, and a 5-year-old boy was standing 20 feet away holding the possible answer. Noah stepped to the microphone and read clearly. "My favorite book is The Little Lighthouse because the lighthouse stays where it belongs so people can always find their way home." The crowd applauded. Ethan closed his eyes for one brief second. Adrian heard the words differently. Home. Find. 5 years. When the ceremony ended, Ethan moved quickly toward Noah, but Adrian reached them before they could leave. He stopped several feet away, careful not to frighten the child. Noah looked between the two adults. "Dad, this is Prince Adrian. We have the same eyes." Ethan's face lost its color. "I noticed." Adrian stared at Ethan. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say, but Noah was watching. So Adrian chose the safest. "Hello, Ethan." Ethan swallowed. "Hello, Adrian." Hearing his name spoken in that familiar voice after 5 years nearly broke Adrian's composure. Noah tugged Ethan's sleeve. "You know him?" Ethan looked down at his son, then back at Adrian. A long time ago. Adrian's gaze moved from Ethan to Noah and back again. The timeline, the surname, the eyes, the disappearance. Every unanswered question suddenly pointed toward the same truth. Adrian spoke softly. "I need to talk to you." Ethan's hand settled on Noah's shoulder. "Not here." "Then tell me where." Ethan hesitated before answering. "The bookstore. After 6. Adrian nodded. He did not ask the question burning inside him. Not in front of Noah. Not surrounded by cameras and strangers. At 6:15 that evening, the bookstore sign turned from open to closed. Margaret took Noah upstairs to choose a bedtime story. Ethan remained beside the counter as Adrian entered alone. The lock clicked behind him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Adrian placed Ethan's old palace access card on the counter between them. Ethan stared at it. Adrian's voice was quiet when he finally asked the question he had been holding all afternoon. "Ethan, is Noah my son?" "Yes." Ethan's answer was barely louder than the ticking clock behind the bookstore counter, but Adrian heard it clearly. For 5 years, he had imagined every possible explanation for Ethan's disappearance. None had prepared him for a single word that could rearrange his entire life. Adrian looked toward the staircase where Noah had disappeared with Margaret. "He is my son." Ethan nodded. "He is." Adrian slowly pulled out a chair, but did not sit. His hands rested against its wooden back as if he needed something solid beneath them. "Did you know before you left?" Ethan looked at the old palace access card lying between them. "I found out that morning." Adrian closed his eyes. The station routes. The unanswered calls. 5 birthdays he had missed without knowing they existed. When he opened his eyes again, there was no anger in them, only something quieter. "Why did you believe you had to run from me?" Ethan had prepared answers for years, but now none sounded simple enough. "I was not running from you alone. I was running from everything around you." Adrian remained silent. Ethan continued. "That week, every newspaper was talking about your marriage. The council was discussing succession. I heard officials talking about your future children like they belonged to the crown before they even existed. Then I learned I was carrying one of those children. You could have told me. And what would have happened?" Ethan asked. "Security would have arrived. Lawyers would have arrived. Advisors would have decided where I lived and how Noah was raised. Maybe you would have tried to stop them, Adrian. But I was terrified that trying would not be enough." Adrian finally Saturday. "I searched for you." Ethan's expression softened. "I know. How?" "I saw your trips on the news. Town after town. You were never interested in regional train stations before." For the first time that evening, Adrian almost smiled. It vanished quickly. 17 routes left the capital that night. Belhaven was the only one I never checked. Ethan looked away. "That is why I chose it." Footsteps sounded upstairs, then faded again. Both men instinctively glanced toward the ceiling. Adrian spoke more carefully now. "Does Noah know anything about me?" "He knows his other father was someone I cared about. I never gave him a name." Adrian absorbed that answer. "I want to know him." Ethan's shoulders tightened. "Knowing him is not the same as claiming him." "I did not say claim. The crown will." Adrian stood. "Then the crown answers to me." Ethan gave a tired shake of his head. "That is exactly what I was afraid of. Noah is not a symbol, Adrian. He likes astronomy and blueberry muffins. He is afraid of thunderstorms, but pretends he is not. He leaves water outside for stray cats. He is a child before he is anything else." Adrian's expression changed with every detail, grief mixing with wonder. "I missed all of that." Ethan said nothing. Adrian looked toward the staircase again. "I cannot recover 5 years. But I can decide what I do with tomorrow." Ethan studied him for a long moment. "One condition. You meet him as Adrian first. Not as the crown prince. No announcements. No palace staff surrounding him. No promises about titles." "Agreed." The answer came immediately. Ethan seemed surprised. Before either could say more, a soft electronic chime came from Adrian's coat. He checked the message, and the color drained from his face. "What happened?" Ethan asked. Adrian turned the screen toward him. A photograph from that afternoon had already reached the national press. It showed Adrian looking directly at Noah outside the literacy center. The resemblance was impossible to miss. Beneath the photograph was a question spreading across news sites faster than either man could stop it. Ethan stared at the screen, then toward the staircase. Adrian quietly put the phone away. They know there is something to find. By 7 the next morning, Belhaven no longer felt invisible. News vans had gathered near Main Street. Unfamiliar cars moved slowly past the bookstore, and Margaret kept the front curtains closed even though the shop was supposed to open in 20 minutes. Ethan stood upstairs watching from the window while Noah ate cereal at the kitchen table, unaware that strangers across the country were debating who he might be. "Why is everybody outside?" Noah asked. Ethan turned from the window. "They heard the prince visited yesterday." Noah accepted that explanation with the easy trust of a 5-year-old. Ethan wished he could. His phone had been ringing since dawn. The school had called. The bookstore had received questions. Someone had even contacted Margaret asking whether Noah had always lived in Belhaven. 5 years of careful privacy were disappearing in hours. A knock came from downstairs. Margaret opened the door only after checking through the glass. Adrian entered alone, wearing jeans, a navy coat, and no royal insignia. Ethan met him at the bottom of the stairs. "You came without security. You asked me to come as Adrian." Ethan glanced toward the windows. It might be too late for that. Adrian handed him a folded newspaper. Ethan did not open it. He had already seen enough online. "The palace called me 14 times, Adrian said. "The royal council wants me back in the capital immediately." "Then go. I am not leaving you to handle this alone." Before Ethan could answer, Noah appeared on the stairs holding a plastic model rocket. He looked at Adrian with delighted recognition. "You came to the bookstore." Adrian's entire expression softened. "I did." Noah descended carefully. "Dad says you like old music." Adrian looked at Ethan, surprised. "Your dad remembers too much. He says you steal pancakes." "That accusation is completely true." Noah smiled. The ordinary exchange lasted less than a minute, but Ethan saw what it did to Adrian. This was no longer an abstract heir or a question of succession. Adrian was meeting his son. Then Adrian's phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. Ethan understood what the sound meant. The crown had arrived, even if its officials had not. Later that morning, Noah went upstairs with Margaret while Ethan and Adrian sat near the darkened bookstore windows. "They will confirm it eventually," Ethan said. "And once they do, they will want control." Adrian leaned forward. "They will not have it. You cannot promise that." "I can promise what I will do." Ethan looked toward the staircase. 5 years ago, I believed disappearing was the only way to give Noah a normal life. If I have to leave Belhaven to protect that life, I will." Adrian went still. "You are thinking about running again." Ethan did not deny it. "There are towns farther west, places smaller than this. And what happens when someone recognizes him there? Do you move again? Change schools again? Spend the next 10 years looking over your shoulder?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "What alternative are you offering?" Adrian had no immediate answer. That silence frightened Ethan more than any promise could have. At noon, a black sedan stopped across the street. An older man in a charcoal suit stepped out and approached the bookstore carrying a sealed envelope embossed with the royal crest. Adrian opened the door before he could knock. "Your Highness," the man said, "the council requests your immediate return. They also request confirmation concerning the child." Adrian took the envelope without opening it. "Tell them they will receive my answer when I am ready." The official hesitated. "This concerns the succession." Adrian looked back through the doorway, where Ethan stood beneath the warm bookstore lights. "No," Adrian said quietly. "This concerns my family." The official left. Ethan stared at Adrian, shaken by the word. Family. That evening, after Noah fell asleep, Ethan pulled the old canvas bag from the back of his closet. He placed it on the bed and began packing. Then someone knocked softly on the cottage door. Ethan opened it and found Adrian standing on the porch. Adrian looked past him at the packed bag. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Adrian said, 5 years ago, you disappeared before I had a choice. This time, give me one. Then choose. Ethan said, keeping one hand on the cottage door. Adrian looked at the canvas bag on the bed behind him, the same kind of bag Ethan had carried out of the capital 5 years earlier. I already have. His voice was calm. I told the royal council that Noah will not be removed from Belhaven, enrolled in a royal program, or presented publicly without your agreement. Ethan stared at him, and they accepted that. No, Adrian stepped inside only after Ethan moved aside. But they understood it. He placed a folder on the kitchen table. There was no royal crest on it, only several pages prepared by Adrian's private attorney. These establish that you remain Noah's primary parent. Nothing changes unless you decide otherwise. Ethan did not touch the papers. You came here with legal documents? I came here with boundaries. Adrian glanced toward Noah's bedroom. The boundaries I should have understood 5 years ago. Ethan's grip loosened around the door handle. What about succession? It can wait. Your council will not agree. The council advises the crown. It does not raise my son. The words settled into the quiet cottage. Ethan had expected Adrian to offer protection, a palace residence, perhaps private schooling behind guarded gates. He had prepared himself to refuse all of it. Instead, Adrian walked toward the packed bag and gently set it upright. Do not leave because of me, he said. If Belhaven is Noah's home, then Belhaven stays his home. Ethan searched his face. What are you asking for? Adrian looked almost uncertain for the first time since arriving. Saturday. Breakfast. Here, if you are comfortable with that. You said Noah likes blueberry muffins. I would like to learn what else he likes. Ethan blinked. That is your plan. For Saturday. A faint smile touched Adrian's face. Sunday can wait. From the hallway came a sleepy voice. Dad. Noah appeared wearing rocket pajamas, rubbing one eye. He noticed Adrian and immediately became more awake. Prince Adrian? Adrian crouched slightly, so they were closer to eye level. Hello, Noah. Noah looked at the bag on the bed. Are we going somewhere? Ethan hesitated. Adrian did not answer for him. That small restraint mattered more than Ethan expected. No, Ethan finally said. Not tonight. Noah nodded, satisfied, then held up a book. Can somebody read this? Ethan recognized the little lighthouse. Adrian looked at him for permission. Ethan gave a small nod. 10 minutes later, Adrian sat at the kitchen table while Noah listened beside him, correcting Adrian whenever he skipped a line. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched the Crown Prince of Westmont receive serious instructions from a 5-year-old about proper storytelling. Nothing about the scene looked royal. That was precisely why Ethan could not look away. After Noah returned to bed, Adrian closed the book. I have a statement tomorrow morning. Ethan's fear returned. About Noah? About me. Adrian explained that he would confirm only that someone important to him had been subjected to unwanted public attention. He would ask the press to leave Belhaven families alone and state that questions concerning his private family would be answered only when everyone involved was ready. You are not naming us? Ethan asked. Not without your permission. Ethan slowly sat across from him. 5 years earlier, he had believed Adrian's power was the greatest danger to their child. Now Adrian was using that same power to protect their right to choose. And after the statement? Ethan asked. Adrian looked around the tiny kitchen, at Noah's drawings on the refrigerator and the half-finished model rocket on the counter. After the statement, I thought I might stay in Belhaven for a while. Ethan stared at him. The Crown Prince cannot simply move into Belhaven. I have discovered that Crown Princes can do several things people insist are impossible. Ethan almost laughed. Adrian smiled, then became serious. I am not asking you to return to my world, Ethan. I am asking whether you will let me learn how to belong in yours. Ethan looked toward the bedroom where Noah slept, then toward the packed canvas bag. Slowly, he stood, removed the clothes from it, and returned them to the dresser. For the first time in 5 years, Adrian watched Ethan unpack. By the end of Adrian's first month in Belhaven, Noah had stopped calling him Prince Adrian. The change happened on an ordinary Saturday morning over blueberry muffins, when Noah looked across the kitchen table and simply said, Adrian, you forgot the napkins. Adrian froze for half a second before standing to get them. Ethan noticed. He noticed everything. Adrian rented a small house 3 blocks away instead of moving into the cottage. He attended school events without royal staff surrounding him, learned that Noah hated peas but loved astronomy, and discovered that helping a 5-year-old build a model rocket required more patience than negotiating with the royal council. He never demanded a title from Noah. He never asked Ethan to return to the capital. Most importantly, he kept every promise he had made. The press eventually left Belhaven after Adrian publicly refused to discuss Noah without Ethan's consent. Months later, when the royal family formally acknowledged Noah, the announcement contained no grand plans for his future. It simply recognized him as Adrian's son and confirmed that his childhood would remain private. The crown could acknowledge him. It could not own him. One evening the following spring, Ethan found Adrian on the cottage porch helping Noah study a map of the night sky. That one is Orion, Adrian said. Noah frowned. You pointed at the wrong star. I was testing you. You were wrong. Ethan laughed from the doorway. Adrian looked back at him with the embarrassed expression of a man who knew he had been defeated. Something warm settled inside Ethan. For years, he had believed safety meant distance. Now he was beginning to understand that safety could also mean having someone who respected the word no and stayed anyway. Their relationship rebuilt itself slowly. There were no dramatic promises. There were grocery runs, school pickups, quiet conversations after Noah went to sleep, and mornings when Adrian appeared with coffee because he remembered exactly how Ethan liked it. Nearly a year after their reunion, Ethan finally agreed to visit the capital. Not because the council summoned him, but because Noah wanted to see where Adrian worked. They traveled by train. As the city skyline appeared beyond the window, Ethan remembered another journey years earlier, when he had watched those same towers disappear into darkness while carrying a secret beneath his heart. His hands began to tremble. Adrian noticed, but did not reach for him immediately. "Do you want to turn around?" he asked. Ethan looked across the aisle. Noah was pressing his face near the window, fascinated by the approaching city. Ethan shook his head. "No, I want to keep going." Adrian smiled. "Then we keep going." At the palace, Noah was introduced not as an heir being prepared for duty, but as a child meeting his family. His bedroom there contained books, a telescope, and absolutely no schedule prepared by the council. Belhaven remained home. The palace became somewhere they visited together. Months later, on a cool October afternoon, the three of them returned from another trip and stepped onto the Belhaven platform beneath red maple leaves. Noah ran ahead toward Margaret, who waited near the station entrance waving both arms. Ethan remained beside the train for a moment. Adrian stood next to him. "You okay?" Ethan looked at the platform where his frightened younger self had arrived with one canvas bag and no idea what came next. "I spent years thinking this station was where my old life ended." Adrian waited. Ethan smiled softly. "I think it was where I learned I could choose my own." Noah turned around and shouted for them to hurry. Adrian offered Ethan his hand, not as a command and not as a promise Ethan was required to accept. Just an invitation. Ethan looked at it, then placed his hand in Adrian's. Together they walked toward Noah, toward Margaret, toward the bookstore lights glowing down Main Street. 5 years earlier, Ethan had arrived in Belhaven believing he had to protect his child alone. Now he walked home with Noah laughing ahead of him and Adrian beside him, finally understanding that home was never a crown, a palace, or a place to hide. Home was the life they had chosen, and this time, none of them had to disappear.